Welcome to EPF. We continue our talk shows on Armenia-Turkey normalization process, and today we have a special guest from the United States, psychologist Pamela Steiner, who also works as a fellow at Harvard School of Public Health. Welcome to EPF, Pamela.
Thank you so much.
Well, obviously the first question is about the purpose of your visit. Can you tell us more? Why are you in Armenia these days?
Sure. I am here to learn more about Armenians who live in Armenia. I know a lot of more Armenians who live in the United States than I do Armenians from Armenia. And I also am here to learn much more than I know now about the situation in Karabakh. So I'm going to Karabakh for 3 days. It's not much, but it's much better than nothing.
You're a psychologist and you work at Harvard School of Public Health, and your profession is working around the issues like collective trauma,
correct,
healing, reconciliation between embittered communities. Can you tell us a little bit more what has been the focus of your research, of your fellowship, of your experience in the last several years with regards to Armenia-Turkey normalization process?
Yes. In the last few years, I have come to focus on trying to explain what collective trauma means. Many people will talk about trauma in a whole people. You will hear historians or policy analysts just mention that of course there was trauma, but they don't talk about what it really means. So as a psychologist, I am specializing in working with people who've been traumatized, and I'm trying to myself build up my own knowledge about what collective trauma looks like in a general way, in a whole people.
But your focus is are individuals, right? As a psychologist,
as a psychologist, as when I see people as a psychotherapist, I see individuals. But I have done many years of work with Israelis and Palestinians and with Armenians and Turks in order to promote a better relationship between each pair. So that's where I am focusing my writing on the nature of collective trauma.
But again, you work with individuals, right? And the collective trauma that each individual shares are different. And they have different manifestations for different people. This collective, for instance, for Armenians, Armenian genocide is perceived differently among different people.
Right.
So when you work with specific individuals, yes, how important the work with specific individuals, if it is just a few of them, rather than the big number of people who share this collective trauma?
Well, that's a problem, and there's no simple answer to that. But we all know that a nation of people has a national identity, and we know that their identity means something very important to them. So we can't jump fully from the individual to the collective and say it's the same thing exactly, but we have to do that to some degree, because you can't go out and talk to a nation and interview a nation. You have to talk to people or read about it. So I do the best I can, which is to talk to as many people as I can, to read as many different books as I can, and to come to a conclusion in that way.
Right, thanks. What is this process of healing for an individual who is bearing the burden of the history on his or her shoulders? Or is this the way towards reconciliation? When we are talking about reconciliation, also Armenian-Turkey, possible reconciliation sometime, does it have to take the healing process first, or there can be some issues that can be put behind and people can start talking to each other about routine everyday problems they witness, and then turn into the historical perspectives and try to explore the justice and truth?
Right. Well, of course people can talk about making business relationships now without doing anything else if they want to. That's fine. That does not contribute necessarily deeply, but it's very, very important, and it will help. Everything helps. There's no one simple answer. It establishes a trust for business. it doesn't necessarily establish a trust for more than that. And I think that we don't have very many examples in the world where this has happened, but people never will forget anywhere, no matter what has happened, and they shouldn't. They will never stop being angry, and they'll never stop being sad. But the question is, can we grow an understanding that is emotional, that is bigger than that? And a lot of that has to do with the other side who has hurt us showing some understanding of us. But then we have to want to become bigger than our hurt.
For many Armenians, the denial policy from Turkey, the genocide denial policy, is an obstacle on the way of normalization. Even deeper than just an obstacle. Many Armenians say that if we start a normalization of relations without Turkey recognizing Armenian genocide, that it will make us forget that this terrible event has happened to us. Not instantly, but during the time, it will vanish. It will disappear from our memory. How important is this aspect? Do you see this issue there, that without recognition, it's impossible to start building relations?
I think it's very hard without recognition, but I think it can be done. And I think probably it's very important for Armenian survival commercially and economically not to have it. So it seems very important, but does it mean that Armenians and Turks will understand and respect each other and be able to live next door to each other without a lot more work, including recognition of realities? I don't think it does. And it will never be forgotten, no matter what happens, but I think trust can be established, but it must be established, real trust, from the heart, on the basis of reality.
You're also using the term soft diplomacy when referring to Armenians in encountering the history and in dialogue with Turkey. What do you mean by soft diplomacy towards Turks that Armenians should have been using or should continue to use rather than being very hardcore, very focused on the just recognition fact and pursue only this in the agenda?
Well, to me, soft diplomacy means you understand that improving the relationship is a long-term process, and that people start where they are. They don't start where you would like them to be. So you have to build bridges, and you have to build understanding, and that takes a lot of time, and I think the soft part of it is you ask them questions to understand them, and to show understanding of where they are at doesn't mean that you agree with it or that you think it is correct. And most people are afraid that if they show understanding of the other, or if they show understanding, it means that they agree with it, and they think it's okay. It does not.
So that's not the case?
I don't know. It is not. It's a separate thing to show understanding and to make a judgment about it. Completely separate. But most people don't understand that. That is also a reality.
All right, but we have another story of committing genocide, Nazi Germany against Jews, and a totally different process of healing, of taking the responsibility, reparations, restitution.
Right.
So when you have this kind of story next to you and your trauma is not being recognized, what would you recommend for people living in Armenia, inside Armenia rather than outside of Armenia? Many want to follow the steps, want to make Turkey to follow the steps that Nazi Germany took.
Well,
but this is not happening.
It's not happening, although I wish it would happen. It would be much better for Turkey as well as for Armenia. But what can Armenians do? They must accept that's the reality. And anyway, in my opinion, the amount of energy that Armenians should place in trying to get Turkey to do what Germany has done post the Nazis is not a good use of Armenian energy. It should be done by some Armenians, but not so much. It's a matter of degree. most of the Armenian energy should go into processing the anger and the grief so that it isn't the front line, and then to build Armenia.
You said, and you mentioned that you have been working with the Israel-Palestine,
Yes.
Arab-Jewish reconciliation and dialogue processes, which is a situation when the crime has been acknowledged by one of the parts.
Right.
Is it the same process? Is it the same dynamics when the crime hasn't been recognized from the other side in Armenia-Turkey context? Can you say that the work that you do with the Israel-Palestine or the Israeli-German part can be followed by the Armenia-Turkey process also?
Well, they're very separate things in some ways. Let me explain something psychologically. After people have been traumatized, in general, there are three responses to trauma before people are healed. The first one is to run away from it when you're in this trauma situation. When the trauma is threatening, people run away if they can. If they can't run away, they fight to prevent it. And if they can't fight, they freeze. They just shut down. And in all of those ways, sometimes people can avoid being killed, you know. But there's a consequence to people's thinking. And after a trauma, people again find themselves to be victimized all over again, or they become perpetrators themselves, or both. Now, in my opinion, Israel, which has not adequately processed the traumatizing experience of the Holocaust, and what exactly that would look like, I still don't know. But some of the upset from the Holocaust is fed into the way they treat Palestinians, so that the traumatized eyes of Israelis see Palestinians a little bit as Nazis. Now, the Palestinians aren't perfect, but the Israelis' treatment of them has made it more difficult because of that. In my opinion, there is some piece of that is the lack of healing among Armenians has kept some of the Armenian energy working in a bad way toward Azerbaijan. So there's one piece of that. Not all. Azerbaijan is certainly very threatening to Armenia, but a part of that is for Armenians working out of the anger toward the Turks.
That's an interesting, actually, comparison and a line of argumentation in terms of psychological processes that happened in parallel worlds, so to say,
yes.
And that this kind of trauma is being then transcended to the other group
Exactly.
who's being associated as the one who committed crime against you
Exactly.
in the history.
Exactly. Human beings as individuals do this all the time. It's called projection. And that happens, you see somebody who reminds you of somebody, good or bad, and you project it onto them. And I'm saying the same kind of process, in part, accounts for the way Armenia relates to Azerbaijan and the way Azerbaijan relates to Armenia. Because at the end of the First World War, the people who became Azeris, there were no Azerbaijan yet, they took the Turkish point of view. Turkey invaded the Caucasus and wanted to kill off the Armenians in the Caucasus, but they were repelled. But the Azeris identified with the Turks.
Do you have any experience working in Armenian-Azeri context of dialogue?
No, but I have colleagues. I have a couple colleagues who have. I have not myself.
But the purpose of going to Karabakh is related to this, or is it a different agenda?
No, it's related to this, because this is what I'm writing about. It is this transference from one situation to another. Now, everybody talks about how history repeats itself, right? They say if we remember, we won't repeat, but that's not true. We remember and we repeat. So something has to give in the middle there.
How important is the aspect of time in this healing and traumatization? Because Armenian genocide 100 years ago, Armenian-Azeri relations...
It doesn't have anything to do with it. When you know somebody who's been traumatized in an extreme way and you mention the trauma to them, they can go back there automatically. They don't have control, and it's all over again. And that's they feel it exactly as they felt it then. And that's why projection happens. Because when somebody meets somebody, say I'm an Armenian, or I'm a Jew, so supposing and this still happens to me. If I go to Germany, I have a tape in my mind, and the tape in my mind says, these are Nazis. Today.
Even these days.
Even today. It's just a tape, though. It's just a replay. It's nothing to do with how I really think, but it's there. It's imprinted in my mind. It will always be in my mind. I hear a German accent of certain kinds, and I hear the Nazis. Ridiculous. But there it is. Now, most people, or many people, we all have tapes. They believe the tape. So what I'm saying is, it's hard, but we have to distinguish the past from the present. It's in our bodies, it's in our heads, you know? And it's in our feelings. It's automatic reactions.
You yourself must have gone through this process of healing, even though after that you still have the symptoms that currently...
Sure. The only difference is now I have perspective on the tape. In the old days, maybe I believed the tape. I did.
Right.
But
yeah, and you must have built a vast experience in Israel-Palestine dialogue or Arab-Jewish dialogue or German-Israeli dialogue, if you have. It's interesting to listen some of the human stories, if you may, if you are allowed also, for us also to learn how this happens in practice. You know, of course, it's one thing to say that we have to be in good relations with the neighbors, with Turks, others, but another thing is to do it in practice.
Yes.
How this is being practiced.
Just as you described. You listen to each other's stories and you tell your story.
And this helps in overcoming...
It helps if it is well done. It helps a great deal.
But also there is this, you know, always this propaganda next to you and the mainstream. How to confront that? What are the mechanisms? What are the processes to provide the alternative approaches and let others also talk and listen to them? If this is not being allowed in a non-democratic countries such as Turkey or Armenia. So is it at all possible to talk about processes like these when you live in a non-democratic society?
Well, you've put it very well. And it seems to me that the main difference is presumably in Eastern Germany, you couldn't even talk to your best friend, right, privately. But in Armenia, you can talk to your best friend. I don't know what it's like in Russia now, if you can have an open conversation with your friends. People you trust, you've got to trust to be able to talk. So that's the big difference. And for a nation to heal, and a nation to move ahead in connection with another nation, democracy will make all the difference, because it is safe to talk in public. And we need to be able to talk in public and say the truth.
And not being persecuted or have the fear of being persecuted. Not necessarily from the government, but from the others as well.
Right, and you will get some of that anyway. I mean, you get it in every country to some degree. Democracy is not a final perfection. Nothing's perfect.
Pamela, I should also mention that you are the great-granddaughter of Ambassador Henry Morgenthau, who served as an ambassador to Ottoman Turkey from 1913 to 1916, right? And Henry Morgenthau is perceived in Armenia as one of the greatest philanthropes who let the world know what's happening right in the process when these atrocities and crimes and genocide was happening to Armenians. You must have read or explored the pieces of documentation that he has left. You know, the Turkish government always says we're fine to open the archives and let everybody come and explore our archives. Erdogan makes these statements, but the ones that we have, the documentation, including the ones that Morgenthau prepared, aren't these enough to label the atrocities as genocide? And what is your approach about the events that happened in 1915 in Ottoman Empire?
Well, I know from reading. I don't know from reading original documents, but I've read a lot of history. So of course I think it was genocide. First of all, there was no word genocide in
Back
1915. Then. So you could not really say that he said it was genocide, but he used other words that amount to the same thing. I think he called it a crime, and I think he said it was the worst, was as bad as it gets. I think it's very hard to compare horrors because it's very subjective, but could not have been worse, really. So your question is, was it enough just to read his stuff to call? I don't know. It's an historian's question, But there's a lot of documentation now, plenty.
And actually, Morgenthau was a unique personality in a way that while serving for the U.S. foreign policy, he could sometimes divert from the mainstream approach in the policy, like even being against Woodrow Wilson, but they were also close friends to each other.
Yeah.
It is interesting just how this friendship developed and how Wilson would be fine with Morgenthau diverting a little bit from the main policy the United States has.
Well, I don't think he was 100% fine. He told him to be careful, and Morgenthau knew he had to be somewhat careful. Can I just go back to your question about documentation? The other documents is an Armenian whom I greatly respect has said to me and has written, Armenians know what happened to them. Their testimony tells you all you need to know, in a way. I think it does.
But one thing is when Armenians speak about it, because they were the victims. Another thing is that the third party is talking about this.
Oh, of course, yes.
This makes a little bit different.
Well, it depends whom you're trying to convince. And in my opinion, Armenians know what happened to them, and they don't have to convince anybody else. They know. They can speak their truth. But the fact of Turkey acknowledging it is a real problem for Turkey. It's less a problem, in my opinion.
So it's also a healing process for Turks, right? It's not only Armenians.
Yes, you would hope that Turkey would recognize that they will be better off in all ways. For them, yes, healing. For Armenians, not so much, I think, because Armenians you have to heal yourself. Nobody else will heal you. It's hard work to heal.
But one issue that Turks always talk about is that what will happen after recognition, for instance. And Armenians also haven't been very vocal in presenting what is the agenda of post-recognition.
Yeah.
Do you have any clues or anything that can help for post-recognition? Are there some psychological processes or some mechanisms developed for post-recognition processes?
There aren't yet, but I'm sure that it's about Armenians working with people who understand processes, and the Armenians will find their answers. But if Armenians don't put their energy into that, how are they going? This is a major national issue. It is just what Armenians should be talking about, in my opinion.
Well, thank you very much, Pamela. It was very interesting to have you here with us. We were talking with Pamela Steiner from Harvard School of Public Health, great-granddaughter of Henry Morgenthau. Continue watching EPF and our talk shows on Armenia-Turkey normalization process.